Yeah, let's get started here. We want to respect people's time. It's 5:30 on the nose, so I just want to extend a word of welcome to all of you who are joining clearly from around the world. I mean, what an extraordinary event we just experienced, the papal transition that elected Pope Leo XIV. My name is Sebastian Gomes. I'm an executive editor at America Magazine. I oversee all of our productions of podcasts and videos, of which we did extensive coverage during the last couple of weeks. So I'm sure a few of you tuned into some of the broadcasts and the content that we created there. But I was only one of several of our team who was on the ground in Rome. We sent a lot of people because this was obviously a huge moment in the life of the church. And it wasn't just to enjoy the lovely Rome weather in the middle of the spring. In fact, I can attest to the fact that we didn't see a lot of the sun because we were cooped up in our makeshift studio Airbnb most of the day, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, trying to churn out that podcast for you. And so all of our content that you saw on our website, our written content. And, part of our job is to, accompany you all, not just to report the news and what's happening in the life of the church, but to accompany you to a deeper understanding of what's happening, especially at a moment like this, when we have this historic transition after an incredible papacy with Pope Francis, and now we have the first U.S.-born Pope in Leo XIV. And with an event like this, obviously, new audience comes as well. So we want to welcome all those who have, been engaging with America for many years or a few years, but also those who, for the first time, are coming across our work and our ministry because of this historic moment. And so, with that, I just want to pass the mic over to Sam Sawyer, editor-in-chief, who would like to just extend a few words of welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day, out of your evening or morning or afternoon or whatever time it happens to be for you to be with us here. I just wanted to say a couple quick words, particularly for those who are new to America, about what we do beyond covering the Vatican. So certainly we make a significant investment in our coverage of the Vatican and the Pope, led by Jerry O'Connell, our correspondent in Rome, and Colleen Dully, who co-hosts the Inside the Vatican podcast along with Jerry. But we also do a whole host of things that if you came in mainly through our conclave coverage, you may not have been introduced to yet. So we call ourselves America, the Jesuit Review of Faith and Culture. We've been around since 1909. We've been publishing a magazine continuously since then, but particularly over the course of the past 10 years or so, we have become a multi-platform media ministry. So we have a website and a daily newsletter that really is now sort of our flagship product. We're still in print once a month. And we also have podcasts and videos and a variety of other ways that we accompany people. So, as I said, we cover Vatican news, certainly, but we also do commentary on how the tradition of the church and how Catholic faith interacts with larger questions in the world. So commentary at the intersection of faith and politics, at the intersection of faith and culture. So we do reviews and we do other cultural content. We have essays on theology and how the tradition of the church is developing and moving forward. And we also have scripture reflections. So on a daily basis, you'll have something from one of our writers, one of our contributors or staff members, looking at the readings of the day and reflecting on it from the experience of their own lives. So a whole host of things that we have at America to offer you. And I'd encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to explore those yet, make sure you're signed up for our daily newsletter, which you can do on our website. Consider subscribing to get access to everything that we do. But we're just really glad to have you here and hope that you'll take this as an invitation to explore everything that America has to offer.
Thank you, Sam. And with that, I'll introduce the others on our panel. So we're joined by Colleen Dully, the host of America Magazine's Inside the Vatican podcast that Sam mentioned. And Colleen was also an ABC News contributor during the Conclave, so you may have seen her on ABC News. And Father James Martin, who's an editor-at-large at America Magazine and was also actually a papal correspondent for ABC News. Sam, again, you're editor-in-chief, and you were on, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so different news outlets I saw over the course of the last several weeks.
CNN right after Pope Leo was announced. So
Right. So we're just thrilled to be back together again, albeit remotely, to talk about this historic moment that we all experienced close up. And let's just start there with the conclave experience. Just to get us going here, maybe we could share one particularly memorable moment from the last couple of weeks. Colleen, would you like to start?
Oh, good. That means I get to take the big one. Certainly, the most memorable moment for me was, well, first the white smoke. So I happened to be in the Holy See press office thinking it felt like it was maybe a little bit too late to get the first afternoon smoke. So I thought that we might be free until 8 p.m. or so, expecting the second. I was wrong. So I was in the Holy See press office, just making my way to the back when all of a sudden I heard all the Italians around me yelling, Bianca, Bianca, vai, 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 go, go, go. And sprinted out the door, up the stairs onto the risers for ABC. And then about an hour later, just, because the election happened so quickly, everyone was thinking it must have been one of the front runners. It must have been Cardinal Parolin or Cardinal Tagle, or maybe Zuppi. And so we were kind of preparing for that. And then they said, Robertum Francescum Cardinalem Prevost. And I was shocked. Sam has said a few times, we kind of thought that we were done with the roller coaster of a Jesuit papacy as a Jesuit magazine. And now we're right back on it with the first American Pope.
Jim, how about you?
Well, that's an easy question to answer. And it's also nice to be back with everyone because we were together in Rome and able to debrief with one another. I was, like Colleen, helping out and Sam helping out on TV, and I was at the ABC set, which was actually on top of the Augustinianum, which is the Augustinian residence and school that would, produce our future Pope, Leo. And I happened to be like Colleen. I thought our Vatican correspondent, Jerry O'Connell, knows everything and everyone. And he said that the smoke will probably come, I think he said at like 6:30. So I was taking a break on a little patio. And I will never forget this. I heard the sound of the crowd, and it was the most joyful sound I've ever heard in my entire life. I couldn't believe the sound. It was just pure joy. And I remembered the line from the book of Revelation. I heard a sound like a mighty roar, like waters, and just the crowd. We talk about that. I found that really powerful. And something someone said to me yesterday on a podcast, Mike Lasky from the Jesuit Conference, which was really interesting. And he said, notice that people weren't cheering because their candidate had won. So it was a kind of pure joy. And I ran out and saw the smoke and sat down, and like Helene was just stunned. We all talked about this. We had him on our list. It wasn't like he was a complete unknown. I would say Parolin, Tagle, and then there were 2 or 3 or 4 kind of compromise candidates: Eveline, David, maybe Zuppi, but Prevost was definitely on people's lips. Nonetheless, seeing him come out and seeing someone that I knew from the Synod come out dressed like the Pope and being the Pope, and then hearing, beforehand, hearing the words Leo, I think that it was just the most brilliant name. But I'll never forget that the most vivid and sort of visceral moment was hearing that crowd, a sound of pure joy, which I'll never forget.
Absolutely. Sam, how about you?
Sure. So I'm actually going to reach a little bit farther back. Not that, the white smoke was amazing, but I think Colleen and Jim have covered that. But it's also a sound from the crowd in St. Peter's Square. So it turns out that the press area, I did not know this until I got there and got a press card. The press area for covering major liturgies in the square is on top of Bernini's colonnade over on the left-hand side as you look at the basilica. So, I never thought I'd be standing on top of the colonnade. But from up there during Pope Francis's funeral, singing the Litany of the Saints and hearing the whole, the full square all the way back along the Via della Conciliazione back to the Tiber, just everybody chanting together. And then we did the Litany of the Saints again as the cardinals were going into conclave. And yeah, something about that being carried in prayer together. The other thing I remember from the crowd, so, at the end of the Pope Francis's funeral, he was driven in procession and, the Pope mobile converted basically into a hearse to Maria Maggiore. and through the streets of Rome with people gathered to welcome him. And then at Pope Leo's first blessing, also, I think 3 times he mentioned and thanked Francis. During his Sunday blessing, his first Sunday blessing, and each time to a swell of applause and an outpouring of gratitude from the crowd. And so being conscious of being accompanied by the saints, but conscious of also being accompanied by Pope Francis, and the deep outpouring of love and gratitude for Francis was really, really moving. And
Yeah, I
now,
think
Sebastian, I get to throw back to you.
well, I'm glad you mentioned Francis, because I think for me, it was a roller coaster from the moment we heard that Francis died. It was early in the morning for us in Eastern time, or Colleen, I guess, here in Central time. But we had an opportunity after several days of working on the ground to go and visit Francis's tomb as a team, and it was just really emotional. It was very moving. It was a little fleeting in that they were kind of shooing you quickly past his tomb, so it wasn't the most prayerful experience standing in front of the tomb, but it just hit me, and it gave me a deep appreciation for Francis that has really only continued now that I'm seeing the first days of Pope Leo's pontificate as well. I mean, appreciating Pope Leo, but and allowing me to kind of look back a little bit with some distance, and now at Francis, and really appreciate what he did for the church. Let's go back to something that Jim brought up, which is the fact that this was really a wide open race. We had reported actually on several very serious conversations, debates that were happening among the cardinals in their pre-conclave meetings, raising questions about things like synodality and the direction that Pope Francis had led the church. And then, as Colleen, as you said, like the shock by how quick the election happened. I mean, we're talking about the 4th ballot, which in the last 100 years, I think, is tied for the fastest election of a pope. 2 other times it happened on the 4th ballot. So this was an extraordinary thing. And now, in hindsight, with Pope Leo coming out on the balcony and then hearing a number of his official addresses in these days, and kind of seeing some of the things that he's talked about and prioritized, the people that he's visited with, you realize that he actually checks a lot of boxes, right? We have someone who's a missionary at heart, who is has a lot of pastoral experience as a bishop, has curial experience working in the Vatican, running the dicastery for bishops, fluent in 5 languages, has a graduate degree in canon law, so he knows the laws of the church, has this global administrative experience when he was the head of the Augustinian order. I think I read that he visited about 50 countries when he was in that role for 2 terms, serving in that role. So I just want to get your take on this. I mean, like, it sort of makes sense, I think, as shocking as it is, now that we have a little bit kind of clearer view of his CV.
Yeah, I'll start. I think that the conventional wisdom was that it could never be an American, or it would be unlikely that it was an American. The Italian press described him, which we always thought was funny, as the least American of the Americans. And what happened was, in hindsight, it should have been obvious to us and to a lot of Vatican reporters. He had the support of Latin America because he was well known there. He was on a pontifical commission, in addition to being a bishop there and very well respected, and he spoke Spanish. He also, because he spoke English, had a kind of affinity with people from the Far East who might not have, we're talking about cardinals in the conclave, and from English-speaking Africa. And, Sebastian, as you said, he does check all the boxes. And I think the other thing to really know is that he's a very nice person. He's a nice guy. And I think I was reflecting that I don't spend a whole lot of time in the Vatican, but the times I'm over there, you hear a lot of negative things about people. This person's too boring. This person's not a good administrator. Whatever. I never hear anything bad about him. And so he's a holy person. And I think the Holy Spirit did a great job, and we're very fortunate. And then one of the reasons I was so moved when he came out on the balcony, I cried after we were finished with the ABC coverage, was because he was, it's nice that he's an American. That's exciting, but it's a really good pick. We're really fortunate and in good hands.
I think, I think one of the other things that was certainly in the mix, but it wasn't clear how it would play out, was this question of continuity with Francis's pontificate and continuity with particularly the initiatives Francis had started, the processes he'd started around synodality, especially. And one of the things that I found very encouraging is both that it seems clear from Leo himself that he very much is working in that model and is committed to. He said so on Saturday in his talk to the cardinals when he gathered them for that meeting. What was that, day 3 of his papacy? That this is, the church has made an irrevocable commitment to Vatican II, and synodality and the model that Pope Francis set forth in Evangelii Gaudium is how the church is living that out. So I think that really clear, consistent message about how continuity with Francis's papacy is going to unfold. But the other thing that I find really encouraging about that is that, only 4 ballots to get there. And as much as, he's, in some sense, yes, he's a compromise candidate. When you look at who the alleged front runners were, of course, nobody has real polling or anything on this. It's all sort of, it's all tea leaves, or as I sometimes joke with our staff, sometimes it's just one tea leaf that people are reading over and over and over again. But I found it really encouraging that there is, that the College of Cardinals was able to together, work towards this continuity with Francis and express it not just in, a kind of grudging or default way, but really, I think, give it a new energy and a new vitality that I see coming through in Leo's approach to it, which is not identical to Francis's approach, right? It looks a little different, it's articulated a little bit differently, but it's equally deep and it's equally much a recognition of how this is the unfolding of the graces of the Second Vatican Council that the Church continues to receive.
Yeah,
I don't know that I have too much to add to that.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you have anything, Colin?
I mean, there's so many directions we could go with it. But, I guess one thing I might mention is just this idea of then Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo, as the unity candidate. And certainly unity is something that we've heard of a lot from him in recent days. But, the College of Cardinals, the cardinal electors who have spoken out already have said that there was a real sense that the Spirit was moving them all towards this candidate, that it was, very clear from like the second or third ballot that this was where they were going, which, as we know from our colleague Jerry O'Connell, is exactly how conclaves usually work. That's when the direction starts coming out. But that he also got an overwhelming majority of the votes. And I think that unity it's not an expression necessarily of compromise. It's an expression of, this person is the right person for the job. And that's in part because he is committed to continuing the Francis legacy on synodality, which he's made very clear. Also, they're pleased with the work that he's done on bishops. He was running the Vatican dicastery for bishops. And, I think that they also have all been drawn, and we hear this over and over, to his personal sense of calm, deep inner peace, spiritual freedom. And so, it's a different style from Francis, but I think that it's maybe misplaced some of the analysis we've seen so far that he is a big departure from Francis, even just stylistically. I think that his election shows support for the Francis direction. It also shows trust in this person, that he is grounded in prayer, that he is, the right person for the job.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating when he first came out on the balcony and gave the Urbi et Orbi address, which is, that's when the eyes of the world are just, fixed on St. Peter's Basilica. And there were 2 things that stuck out to me. One, that what he was actually wearing. He was wearing the red mozzetta, which Pope Francis had chosen not to wear when he was first elected and came out on the balcony. So there was that sort of moment of discontinuity, if you want to call it that. And at the same time, he actually mentioned the word synodality. And in his, in an address to the world, where most of the people who are staring at the balcony and staring at him are not going to have a clue what synodality is, he still felt it was important for him to message, at least to the Catholics around the world, that synodality is something that he is going to pick up and continue. So I just found that fascinating, that it seemed like he was free to kind of, be himself and choose how, as you're saying, Sam, he was going to pursue continuity, but without kind of losing his own, personality, disposition, preferences, priorities.
Yeah, and I think, anyone, even among the Catholic geeks who do know what the word synodality means and use it somewhat frequently, like if you had your bingo card, you would not have expected Mosetta and synodality mentioned like within the first 20 words to be in the same row on that bingo card.
Well, and also if you think about it, that was like a 3 or 4 paragraph speech, which was beautiful, by the way. And
Yeah.
I mean, which he must have
He
composed.
can write.
He can write, which he must have composed within an hour, of whatever is his election. I was thinking, he could have mentioned a million different other things. He could have mentioned the Blessed Mother. He could have mentioned the Eucharist. He could have mentioned Gaudium et Spes. I mean, a million things he could have mentioned. He could have mentioned the Acts of the Apostles, St. Paul, St. Augustine more. But yes, Sam, that he chose to mention synodality, and then again, mention it with the cardinals, I think shows pretty clearly. I will quote Sam Sawyer, our editor-in-chief, who is with us. One of the great
Always
lines.
a good idea, Jim.
Always a good idea. Sam said, "Well, people wanted clarity; they got clarity." He's clear. He's being very clear about what he wants to do, but I think in a very gentle way too. It's not browbeating people.
Well, we
And
should
sorry,
also
not
say,
to belabor this, but it's not just lip service to synodality either, which there had been some concern in the conclave about that. There's so much for the Pope Francis direction, so we'd get somebody who spoke the Francis language, but maybe didn't walk the Francis walk. But right away, on again the third day of his papacy, when he gave that talk to the cardinals, right after that talk to the cardinals, he sat them down for 2 hours and said, "Okay, we're back in the room where we had our general congregations before the conclave. Now I want to hear from you. I want to continue the conversation." That's synodality.
the other thing I want to mention, because I think the word he's used even more consistently than talking about synodality is the very first words with which he greeted the church and the world were "peace be with you." And he has returned to that theme of peace over and over again. It's clear that, the conflicts in Gaza, in Ukraine, elsewhere in the world are very much on his mind. But calling us to this deep peace. And one of the really beautiful lines, and a line that I wish, there'd been more space to give it more attention. But he started off, "Peace be with you. This is the peace of the risen Christ. This is the greeting of the risen Christ." And he says that it offers us a disarmed peace and a disarming peace, which is just so beautiful. And then that line came up again on Monday in his audience with members of the media, where he asked us, and he was referring back to Pope Francis's World Communications Day message here, but he asked us to commit to a disarmed communication as well, that can help build peace. And so I think that focus on peace, he's talked about it over and over again. I expect we'll continue to hear it from him. And I think I think that is the way he wants to introduce himself to the world. And that's he wants to put the church very clearly on the side of peace.
One of the symbols that stands out to me early on that relates to this is that he has brought back signing his name with the initials PP, Pontifex Pontificem, bridge builder. And it seems clear right off the bat that that is what he intends to be in his papacy.
Just before we continue, I just wanted to mention to everybody watching that the chat is open, so please feel free to there's a lot of people who are just posting where they're calling in from and saying hello, and so we thank you for that. Please feel free to share questions or comments. I don't know if we're going to have a chance to get to many of them because we still have a whole bunch of topics we want to get through here in this call, but they are really helpful for us. They give us ideas for what to write about. And I just wanted to note, and I'll mention this at the end as well, we're going to do a follow-up webinar to this one that directly responds to questions from you all. So I'll share a little bit more about that at the end of the conversation, but please feel free to post questions and comments in the chat. Let's get back to this fact that we have the first American-born Pope. And I acknowledge the fact that there are many people from all around the world on this webinar who are not American. But I just want to mention that because it's a totally new thing for us. Many people on this call are American. And I think the church in the United States is a very interesting church and a very interesting dynamic right now. Obviously, the level of influence on the global stage politically is one factor. But also, the church has been polarized for the last several years in the United States. That wasn't, it's not shocking for people to hear. And in many cases, we had Pope Francis during the last 12 years seemingly at odds with the quote unquote church in the United States and some of his messaging, some of his priorities. And so I just want to give us a chance to reflect on this. What does this actually mean that we have the first Pope who was born in the United States, who speaks perfect language with an American accent? Midwestern accent, I should say.
So let me
That
jump
is
in
the
here.
perfect accent.
I also want to acknowledge, because I'm seeing it in the chat as well, the first North American Pope, the first U.S.-born Pope. So yeah, because American also can mean both Americas, the continents together. And that's often, in fact, how it's used in the church. And we've heard calls within the church for that the Americas, North America and South America, or, Anglosphere America and Latin America need to understand each other as part of the same reality. So in that sense, the second American Pope, the first US-born Pope. But I think it's clear that, he could not have been elected. He certainly could not have been elected as quickly and with as much unity if he did not have the kind of deep formation that his experience in Peru had given him. If he was not seen as equally belonging to Latin America, maybe in a sense more so than he does to the US in many ways. And I think it's also, this is a place where I am conscious as somebody from the United States that I think our experience in the North American context of what it means to have a pope who's from where we're from is actually a lot different than the experience of the rest of the global church. I think for much of the church, the fact that he happens to be from the United States is sort of like, interesting, actually not all that important given who he is. Whereas our experience is almost the inverse of that, which I think is kind of striking. I think it's also natural for us, but I think we are thinking much more about what it means for him to be from the United States than the rest of the College of Cardinals that elected him was thinking about it, if that makes sense. And I think it's one of the things I actually hope for here is I hope this the experience of having a pope who's from the U.S. will actually decenter the U.S. a little bit from being so self-reflexive, because we'll see him paying attention to the rest of the church. And it won't just be, because he's not from here. It'll be someone who's from here who understands us deeply well, is paying attention to the rest of the life of the rest of the church in the rest of the world.
Yeah, and certainly that's what the U.S. cardinal electors said at their press conference shortly after the conclave. They said, we weren't picking him because he was American, because he was our guy. We were picking him because we thought he was the right person for the job.
Because he's Peruvian.
Exactly. He has dual citizenship. So, I mean,
right.
all the Peruvian papers the morning after the conclave were Peruvian Pope, which I think is a helpful perspective. But there's a few different interesting angles to look at this question from of, what does it mean to have a US-born Pope? One is, like Sam was saying, this question of how it'll affect the US church. And I think that there's great hope among people of all church political stripes that he's going to be a unifier, that he's going to be somebody who can kind of give the full picture of Catholic social teaching in the American context. I've heard some people saying, maybe he is the kind of counterpart on the global stage to J.D. Vance, who is, the most prominent American Catholic before now. Now we have the American Pope giving a different kind of message. But I think also, I do the podcast with Jerry O'Connell, who's our Vatican correspondent, who is Irish born and has lived in Rome since 1985. And so together we tend to take a much broader international perspective. And I think it's a really interesting question what will an American in this high position of moral leadership with, again, like he's a head of state, but no army, no like land grabbing interests, right? What will that mean for the world, for the global church, for international geopolitics? And one interesting thing that we've seen already is that he may be able to sway US government officials in a different way than previous popes could. Whereas I think there was often clashes between the US government and Pope Francis. I remember especially around the Vatican-China deal. Here, we just saw that Donald Trump seems to have kind of backed off a bit from his insistence on his centrality in creating peace between Russia and Ukraine, and instead posted on Truth Social yesterday or 2 days ago that the Vatican has offered to mediate, which has been the case for years now, ever since this war began, or restarted. But now he's saying, yeah, let the process begin. He seems to be stepping back from insisting that he be part of it, which I think is really interesting. And I wonder, whether we'll see more of that, whether this will actually give the Vatican more ability to mediate peace, especially in, such a time of wars all around the world. A third world war fought piecemeal, as Pope Francis often said, and as Leo has quoted him saying.
I think that's a very good point, Colleen. I think that it's just natural to feel that a person who speaks your language and is from your country understands you, and so you're going to take his advice more. The times that I was with Francis, I mean, even though I felt close to him, there was a translator, and there was this sense of kind of at one remove. So I think that's really fascinating, that not only because of what he's saying, but how he's saying and who he is as he's saying it, will influence American politicians. I really hold out a lot of hope that this is this is a lot to invest in one person, that he could really bridge a lot of the gaps in the United States church, right? In the Church of the United States. And I think there's a desire for people, I don't want to say sides, but progressives, traditionalists, liberal, conservative, whatever you want to say. I think there's a real desire for unity. I think that's one of the things that sort of subconsciously people were, or maybe unconsciously, were excited about. This guy can really bring the church together. And I think both groups of people want that, and they're looking for a way forward. And I think he's really done a few things that have helped people in both camps. I hate these sides and stuff, but we all know what we're talking about. And I think there's a lot of goodwill towards him. Now, it's a honeymoon period, and everyone thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread. And eventually he'll say things that, annoy people, and he actually already has in some quarters. But I think he's the one to do it. And I actually think, it's funny, Sam, you're talking about the decentralization of the church in this way, and sort of our looking further afield. I think it's actually interesting to think that the United States church is kind of a bellwether for other churches in terms of polarization and what we do and how things are sort of lived out. And so actually spending his time and maybe spending some of his moral capital on the U.S., instead of being seen as parochial, might actually be kind of a universal good, because people will see that, well, if even in the United States there can be bridge building and kind of reconciliation and less polarization, then hey, maybe in our country it's possible too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I think, in that sense.
Yeah, well, I think also there's likely to be an effect simply from the fact that he is, he grew up in Chicago, and we're going to be seeing him on the world stage over and over again. He asks Catholics in the United States the implicit question of, how are you going to live out the gospel? And I think makes our very one-sided answers that we can sometimes go to, or the answers that, that fit well into the other extremes of American political life. I mean, this is an argument I made in a New York Times op-ed shortly after he was elected, but I think he's going to make those answers less tenable just by his example of living out a consistent, across-the-board witness to the gospel, in front of the eyes of the whole world. That's going to automatically ask us in the United States, as Catholics, how are we living out our faith, and can we rise to this example?
I think there's also this, if I can interject for a second, I think there's something else that happened afterwards, which is that most people didn't know much about his background, right? And for example, the story in the New York Times from Father Bob to Pope Leo, which was beautiful, really helped fill people in. And I think one of the added benefits of Pope Leo is that his own story is very compelling and it draws people to him, right? And they say, this boy, this person who, worked with the poor and was bishop in this poor country, you've seen the pictures of him kind of standing in the floodwaters. I think it disposes people to him because they see in him someone who doesn't just check all the boxes, which he does, but who himself is a holy person, has lived. I mean, I don't want to go too far, but when I was reading that article in the Times, it was like reading like Lives of the Saints. And I think that really resonates with people, and I think it disposes people to listen to him and to be open to him. I certainly hope it does.
I want to pivot a little bit, but I think it's a really important factor about Pope Leo, which is that he's an Augustinian. And, it was such news and exciting news for us at America, obviously, that when Pope Francis was elected, the first Jesuit pope, this is relatively uncommon that the papacy is, occupied by a person who is from a religious order, who's taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, doesn't, quote unquote, seek ecclesial, advancement, right? Is not typically on the path to, becoming a bishop or a leader in an ecclesiastical sense. But 2 times in a row is a bit of a trend. So because we have a couple Jesuits on the call here, I wanted to throw the question, particularly to you guys, how you understand the decision of the cardinals, the decision of the Universal Church, really, to elect another pope from a religious community.
I would say, echoing something Colleen said, which is they didn't vote for him because he's an American. From what I've heard from the Cardinals, I think it's an added thing, but I don't think it was because he was a religious, right? I think that may have contributed to his spirituality and his, his outlook on life, but I don't think they were saying we want another religious. I think they were saying we want him. And I think if he were a diocesan priest who had more or less the same experience, bishop in Chiclayo and working with the poor and dicastery and all the boxes you were talking about, Sebastian, I think he would have still been elected.
Jim, can I jump in there?
Sure.
I just want to throw this other kind of question in there. So is there something about the way that religious live in the church today that allows them to check more boxes? Like, does the life of a person who joins a religious community almost, give them exposure to different opportunities, like being a missionary in a different place, like heading a global community where you're traveling to 50 different countries to visit, local chapters and things like that? I mean, it's an interesting kind of thought experiment.
It's a good point. And I think you could have someone who, for example, like I'm sure Cardinal Tagle worked in poor parishes in the Philippines, but you're right in terms of his global outreach, as the head of the prior general of the Augustinians, you're absolutely right. I guess what I'm saying is, my sense is, I don't think they were looking for a religious, but who knows? What do you think, Sam?
Well, so, I'm remembering something our colleague Jerry O'Connell said. I think this was on our podcast wrapping up after he was elected and we knew who he was, that, there's the religious orders often serve as kind of a resource or a wellspring for renewal in the life of the church. And that if this is a moment where the church needs that kind of renewal, then, it can kind of be natural, not in the intentional, let's go get a religious way, but that what the religious orders have to offer from our charisms are more useful or more helpful at this juncture in the life of the church. I will say one thing I find particularly hopeful about him, that I'm not sure, like, this jumps out to me as a religious, and I'm not sure how obvious it would be outside, but the fact that the Augustinians twice, not just once, but twice elected him as their prior general. So first, it's given him this worldwide experience of the church that there's really no other way to get, short of being a superior general of a global order or pope, as far as I know. Like, those are the 2 ways that you would see the church in that many different contexts. But it's also, I know the quality of people that we elect to the role of superior general in the Jesuits. And, so it's not going to mean, I think he's certainly plenty smart, and very, very talented. but it means what it says to me is he's deeply trustworthy. He's a good listener. He's like that calmness, that serenity that a lot of people have named. Like that is, I think, very often the quality that people are looking for in electing a superior general or prior general for a whole order. Someone who can really work together with people across a huge variety of different contexts and experiences. And knowing that he has that prior experience and that the Augustinians were able to trust him that way, just sort of automatically, I start off very, very hopeful about what he's going to be able to offer as a center of unity in the life of the church.
And let me add one thing there, just on the note about renewal and the religious orders being a source for this. If we're having from this conclave a full-scale endorsement of synodality, it is from the religious orders, and the synod organizers know this, and certainly synod participants know this. The religious orders have provided an invaluable experience to the church of years and years of communal discernment, which is exactly the kind of discernment that we're switching towards in the Catholic Church for our decision-making in this new system of synodality. And so I think like having that kind of depth of experience in that kind of decision-making is going to be really important for a church that is relatively new to this type of discernment.
And then the last thing I wanted to add, because I just saw this scroll through in the chat, someone said, clericalism is not as pronounced in the religious orders, which I hope is true. I'm not sure it's always true, but I think there is something, and it reminded me actually of his closing line from his initial Urbi et Orbi blessing, where he quoted Augustine and he said, "With you I am a Christian, for you I am a bishop." But I think being rooted in that identity, like as a member of a religious order, you're rooted in a charism that is shared more deeply than the fact that you happen to be ordained. And I think he's expressing that as well in that quote from Augustine about the common rooting in our baptismal identity as Christians. And I think he has, his lived imagination of that reality as a member of a religious order, I think will also influence the way he exercises his ministry as Pope.
Sam, I want to pick up on something very briefly about him being a two-time prior general of the Augustinians. One of the Augustinians told me the first time meant that we trusted him. The second time meant that he had done a good job. And so it's kind of unbeatable. I mean, when you think about it.
I'd like to name something that we're living like at this moment, like in, just a matter of a week, a couple weeks, that all this stuff is happening and unfolding in real time. And that is, there's a tendency, we're already seeing it in the Catholic media in particular, to try to claim Leo XIV. And in a sense, this is a very natural thing to do. I'm a Catholic. There are things about the faith that I love and that I would love to see prioritized. And when, Pope Francis did something that I loved, I would applaud Pope Francis for it. If he did something that I didn't love, maybe I was like, and this is hard and it challenges me. So it's natural to kind of look for and parse the few things that we've seen and heard from Pope Leo and try to project that or project our way of looking at the church onto him. So I just wanted to name that and give us a chance to talk through it briefly to see if any thoughts came out for how to kind of navigate this moment and navigate these feelings that are happening inside each of us.
I'll jump in on it.
Yeah, go ahead.
You go ahead, Jim.
I would say exactly what you said. It's natural. And we all have our likes and dislikes and our desires for the church, and not in a selfish way, but we want certain things for the church. We want it to be more this, more that, more X, more Y. It's natural. So I wouldn't say feel guilty about it. If you're an LGBTQ person, you're naturally going to be interested in what he says or has said, but I think I got a call from a reporter the day after he was elected. What do you think about his comments on LGBT people in the past? And I said, first of all, he's been in office a day, like give the guy a break. Second of all, what a cardinal says is not necessarily what a pope is going to do or say. But I think the key thing is that, he's probably going to be around for a long time, and we have to accept the fact that he's going to grow and deepen if he is synodal, as he says he is. And I sat at his table at the synod and he did listen. He's going to grow and discern and be open. And the Holy Spirit's going to work on him just the way the Holy Spirit worked on the cardinals in the conclave. So to really Be a little patient, right? I'm an impatient person. Colleen and Sebastian and Sam know that. But a little patience here and a trust in the Holy Spirit without kind of reflexively, kind of judging him, as either, for or against, I think is really helpful. It's a spiritual discipline.
It's good to get the note from the spiritual director in the room first. I guess, what I would add is Leo had this, where do I want to start? Basically, and I just posted a TikTok saying this, but whenever a new pope comes into office and then throughout his entire papacy, he has a way of infusing his personality into kind of the broader character of the church. And maybe this is just me projecting my experience onto previous papacies. But, I remember under the Benedict pontificate, he was a scholar pope. And so all of a sudden, we were getting invited to all these like scholarly reading groups. The whole discourse online was about like apologetics and everything. And then Francis came in, and all of a sudden it was like there were all these like welcoming ministries popping up, and the church kind of really took on this Francis inspired face. And so, I mean, I have no reason to believe that wouldn't happen with Leo as well. And I think that the discipline we can learn from him, which then can keep us from rushing to claim him for whatever we're looking for, because again, it's early days, it's too early to know, but is following Leo's example of, again, deep listening, a priority on dialogue. He had this amazing talk on Sunday, this past Sunday, maybe Saturday actually, to a group called Centesimus Annus. And he talked about the importance of like dialogue first, listening first, and that the role of that in doctrine. He described doctrine as kind of this journey that we're all on, this multidisciplinary search, rather than something that kind of comes down from above, like an anvil in a Looney Tunes cartoon, right? And anyway, all this to say, I think that the vibe shift, to quote Gen Z, for Leo is going to be towards a mood, a disposition of calm, of listening, of like serenity, of not jumping to conclusions. And I think that we can take that as our guide in this moment. And I think that the wider church, especially those rushing to claim him for whatever they want to, would do well to follow that example.
Yeah, just a couple things here. So I certainly echo Jim and say it is very natural to ask, what does Pope Leo think about X, Y, or Z? And we've seen a bunch of these questions scroll through the chat already. Very natural. We're asking those same questions as journalists, and we will continue writing about them at America, certainly. But I also, I remember an experience I had early on during my Jesuit novitiate, actually, where a bunch of us, Jesuit novices, had been in religious life all of like 3 months, and so of course knew everything about every issue facing the church, and were deeply embroiled in some discussion. And one of my closest friends in the Jesuits came into the room and listened to us for a little while, and then interrupted to say, "So the answer is we don't know." And 20 plus years later, that is still in my head, because I think I think that's a spiritual discipline as well, to just practice saying, so the answer is we don't know. And very often we're going to ask these questions that are natural questions, but the answer is we don't know, or we don't know yet. The other thing I would say, though, about Leo is that very often, the question that we're asking, or like the subtext of the question is, does he agree with me? Does he have the right answer, or what I think the right answer is? And I think more important than that is to allow ourselves to be challenged and invited to conversion by what he's going to say. So I think, this comes across to me very clearly just in the way he carries himself, that he's going to be calling us all deeper into the gospel. He's certainly, by the choice of his name, he's indicated that he's going to call the whole church into a deeper reflection on Catholic social teaching and what that means. And I would be very surprised if I come through that thinking all the same things that I think right now. I hope I don't come through that thinking all the same things that I think right now. And so I think to approach this, what does Pope Leo think about X? Not only trying to sort of decode him and figure out where he lines up, but also with an openness to the Spirit is working through his ministry and working through the whole church, through the dialogue that we share together as a synodal church, through the way that we walk this path together, and is going to call the whole church into deeper conversion, so that where we are right now might not be where we are intended to wind up.
Yeah, so maybe if we don't bite at that lure that was cast at us in the chat to engage with some of the hot button topics, I still want to ask a question about general direction, because we have seen, even though he's only given, I don't know, 6 or 7 kind of addresses, a handful of homilies, we have seen a number of themes emerge. So he's mentioned, we've talked about this, he's mentioned synodality and his, his desire to continue what Francis started, albeit will have a different kind of, emphasis in one way, shape, or form. He had a meeting with, members of other Christian traditions and other religions. He's talked about ecumenism and the work for Christian unity very, very powerfully, and his desire to continue moving that forward, coming from the impulse of the Second Vatican Council in the 60s and carrying that forward. Strikingly, and this is connected to the choice of name Leo, he's mentioned artificial intelligence as something that is deeply concerning him. He kind of sees this as a kind of another kind of industrial revolution, as Leo XIII saw the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 19th century, as a great challenge that the church had to face. And then, Sam, you mentioned this before. He's talked about peace over and over and over again. And unity was the other thing, Colleen, that you mentioned. So, I mean, I'm just throwing those out there to get the conversation going a bit. But apart from the hot button issues, what are the directions, the general trends, or the questions that you have or that you'll be looking for in your deeper attempt to understand Pope Leo at a deeper level and to see what direction he's trying to take the church and the vision that he has for the church?
It's a great question. I think one thing that I think will be really indicative of the direction he wants to take the church, and one that hasn't kind of been mentioned much yet, is his decisions on bishops, how bishops work, because he is part of I think he even chairs the Synod study group on the role of bishops, which we know wanted bishops to take a much more synodal direction. I think that's also a more collegial direction, so work amongst the bishops, amongst themselves, because they often feel very isolated.
Sorry to interrupt, Colleen, but just to add also the question of opening up the selection of bishops to a wider group of people, right? And Jim,
absolutely, he's been a big advocate of that. And I was talking with someone who was on the dicastery for bishops with him. Pope Francis appointed women to that body for the first time, women officially having a say in who gets chosen for the Terna, the list of 3 candidates that gets passed along to the Pope. Leo will also have to, so one, I've heard that he worked very well with the women on that commission, which is great. The other thing is that Leo will have to appoint his replacement. So we'll see who he chooses to then be choosing bishops. So I think that there's a lot at play here on the direction that he wants to go in terms of bishops, in terms of how he's directing them to act, in terms of who he's choosing, and all of that, I think, will indicate pretty concretely where this whole synodality thing is going.
Yeah, and I would say, interestingly, Sebastian, as you were talking about the things that he's brought up, I often wonder, I mean, it's only been about a week. I wonder how much of that is just a function of who has been on his schedule. You know what I mean? So he happened to have the group of, ecumenical patriarchs, and they were there. So I'm wondering if that's just, he happened to have talked about that because that was on the schedule. I'm thinking, I agree with Colleen in terms of synodality. I think one of the open questions at the synod, and we all sort of struggle with it, was how to really put teeth into this process. And of course, one of the last things Pope Francis did, from the hospital, was to set up this sort of review in 2028. And I think what'll be interesting with Pope Leo is, what does he do in between now and then? right, to foster synodality. I mean, he's already started. I thought it was fascinating, Colleen, what you were saying, that he, met the cardinals in that particular way, right, in a synodal way. And I'm sure you read the stories that said that some of the cardinals who had not been at the synod and who had not participated in that way were sort of thunderstruck and sort of didn't want to talk to anybody. So the question is, what will he do concretely? And we don't know, to really deepen the church's reliance on the synodal way, the synodal path. I mean, because in other words, he can't, I mean, he could, but he could simply say nothing and then just wait till 2028. But the fact that he mentioned it, as Sam was saying, in his inaugural address, an hour after he was elected, and then sent it to the cardinals, leads me to believe that he's gonna do something to really sort of deepen it and put teeth into it.
Well, and Jim, here's the other thing on that. We have all of these synod study groups, the 10, I believe now 11, maybe 12. There was another one recommended, study groups that are supposed to be turning in their work, their recommendations to the Pope this summer. That presumably has been delayed, but I assume that he'll probably at least direct them to continue the work they're doing. There are also commissions that came out of the synod. These are about less controversial issues and more about things that the synod was pretty much unanimous on. We need to actually take a look at these things and take some actions on them. And one of those was canon law, changes to canon law that might be required to make the church more synodal. So things like, moving some of the governing authority of bishops to be able to be shared with lay people, that kind of thing. The interesting thing is that is where I think that the rubber is going to hit the road in terms of implementing synodality. And this Pope is trained as a canonist.
Exactly.
He's going to know exactly what needs to happen in canon law. I've heard stories about him getting into, exchanges with people and being able to quote canons from memory. So yeah, I think that this will be a Pope who can give it teeth if he wants to.
Last word to you, Sam, just quickly, any thoughts on the future direction?
So I mean, I would echo what Colleen and Jim have said in so many ways. But the other thing, I'm going to be really interested to see, where his first, whether it's an encyclical or an exhortation, but what his first big document is. I think, there's probably a hunch that there's going to be something about AI in there, kind of delivering on the nod back to Leo XIII and Rerum Novarum and Catholic social teaching. But yeah, but I'll be fascinated because I think, I mean, this feels like an easy prediction. I think he's going to surprise us in some ways. I don't think it's certainly not going to be just an AI document. And I think that this, already the way he's approaching synodality, but with this lens of collegiality and really how he's going to bring the bishops and cardinals along with him, looking at AI, but reaching back into the history and the depths of the Catholic social teaching tradition and reminding us that this is fully a part of the tradition of the church that we're living out of. I'm fascinated to see what he's going to do. And I guess I find myself sort of eager to be surprised by him. And because I think he tends to surprise in the direction of depth. Yeah, particularly, I mean, if I could give people advice, I would say, go back and read Augustine, because he's going to keep drawing on Augustine. He's done that a few times already. So, read the Confessions or reread the Confessions, and then probably dive into City of God, your summer beach reading.
Well, there's your book club right there. People were asking for a book club, so you can start there.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being on the panel with me and for sharing your experiences and your wisdom and your insights. And thank you all for joining us. So just a reminder, I said I would come back to this. We are going to do a follow-up webinar where we answer your questions about the conclave and we, kind of analyze Pope Leo XIV. I think we're aiming for a look at his first month. So in a couple weeks, we don't have an exact date for it yet. But I just want to encourage you, make sure you're signed up for our newsletter so that you're notified about when exactly it's going to happen. That one will be for subscribers only. So we welcome all of you who have joined today. We're so happy that you have just engaged with us and you're interested in this stuff. So please continue. Please, you can visit americanmagazine.org/trial. If you haven't subscribed already, it's $1 for your first month. So just a special trial offer for you. And our next webinar, where we talk a little bit more in depth about this stuff, will feature Gerard O'Connell, who's our Vatican correspondent, who knew Francis well and is very much an insider around the Vatican. So he'll have some incredible perspectives to share. So that's going to be coming up in the next couple weeks. Make sure you sign up for the newsletter and become a subscriber. And with that, I will toss it over to Sam to do some final thank yous.
Thanks. As you can imagine, when you take 8 people and have to get them to Rome on about 3 days' notice, that takes some doing. And we're very grateful to the loyal and generous friends of American Media who supported our Pope Francis funeral and conclave coverage and allowed us to be there and accompany all of you through the podcasts and the videos and the emails and all the other coverage we produced from on the ground in Rome. So in a particular way, I want to thank Kim Bepler, Marion Wynne Rutherford, Carl and Teresa DeBarbary, Mary Alice and Tom Roberts, Susan Braddock, Mary Joy and Jerry Petrie, and Barbara and Tom Kiernan. And then you see a bunch of other names of very generous people. We are so grateful to you and to all the benefactors and subscribers and all those who help support our ministry here at American Media. We continue to pray for all of you in gratitude, especially whenever we celebrate Mass here in the office in New York. But thank you, and we hope for all of you who are new to American Media that you will consider becoming a subscriber, that you'll stay connected with us and follow the life of the church, both what's going on in the early days of Leo's papacy, but also all the different ways that Catholics across the world are living out their faith. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.